This is the place for podcasters.
One of the best pieces of advice that I often offer to new podcasters is to make sure you're listening to other podcasts. There's so much that we can learn just by listening to the way other people do the thing that we love to do or the thing that we want to be able to do in the near future. So in this video, I wanted to share some clips of a recent podcast that I filmed. It's called Good Podcasting. My guest in this episode is Harrison Tash. I'll introduce him when we get to the actual podcast. But I filmed this one, wanted to share some clips with you because there's a lot that he had to offer as far as purpose of his podcast, how he got started, the help he found when he needed it, and what he's doing now moving forward. And now, here are clips from episode 29 of Good Podcasting. Hey there, and welcome to Good Podcasting, the show designed to help you create, launch, and grow your podcast. My name's Brian. I'm the host of the show. And today I am talking with Harrison Tash, the founder and lead consultant of Living Water Consulting. And more importantly, the reason he's here, he's the host of the People Development Podcast. Let's get into today's episode. Harrison, welcome to Good Podcasting, man. I'm excited to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks, Brian. I'm happy to be here as well. And you got a great podcast, so I'm happy to be on it.
Let's talk about what you do. You are the founder and lead consultant of Living Water Consulting, right? Tell us a little bit about that business and kind of how you got started doing that.
Yeah, I guess, starting out, I just had a passion for helping people, develop in their careers. And I had an opportunity with a large corporation to kind of write my own job description. It was a great opportunity for me to really use my unique skills and talents and help them in their organization. But even beyond that, I had a talent, or at least developing a talent is what I was doing over the last decade of developing this talent of try to help people hit their goals. People wanted to get somewhere, but along the way they get stuck or things just happen and they get stuck in those goals and they just don't reach them sometimes. And I had a lot of really good people around me that were helping me reach my goals. And so I started getting into more of the company aspect of strategy and really helping organizations, specifically the one I was working for at the time, helping them in their strategy and how to hit those goals that they had, the plans that they had created. So it created this passion, and out of that, the podcast kind of came about because we were having a lot of great one-on-one conversations with like directors, CEOs, presidents, and just networks that I had created over the years. And so over those conversations, I was like, we've got to record these. We've got to get these down somewhere. And I had no experience as a podcaster. But lucky for me, my wife is pretty techie, and so she was able to figure out things at first, and kind of that was the birth of the podcast. She had actually looked up a lot of things and said, "This is what you need to do," and so she kind of got me started in a way. But it was definitely a hard start for me because I am not the tech guy.
You started with the purpose of you just wanting to help people, develop people, focus on like top leaders, CEOs, executive directors, and things like that. Is that who your target was when you started the podcast, and is that still the case?
Yeah, definitely the leadership level, right? Whether it's the CEO or going down to the director level.
Yeah.
But the premise behind the podcast really originated out of the idea of sometimes we focus on ourselves way too much. And, the concept is what if we really turned our attention to the people who need us the most, the ones who are developing, the ones that need help with things, the ones that are, looking to build their careers? What if out of that focus, we learned more than just trying to focus on ourselves and get ourselves up to the next level? So that's where the people development came out of, was the concept of focusing on other people around you.
So you have your Mac, you started recording. I'm assuming, are you using GarageBand? Is that what you were recording into?
Yeah. So I use GarageBand, and there was, I watched lots of videos that showed you how to do it on a PC and which, things to use. And so, I started using Zencastr to help with the video side. And, we used a few different things to actually edit the podcast. But But now I think, if I was to give people advice, if you're a Mac user, definitely use GarageBand because it's simple. There's so many videos out there that help you. But, your original question was like, what did you do to get started? And honestly, it was just a mic that plugged in through USB. And,
Okay.
The first time I used the mic, it sounded pretty good. I thought it sounded a lot better than using your computer sound, right?
Oh, right on.
Yeah. And so, then I found out that, this little tripod with the mic, I had to lean over too much. So my neck was hurting. I was like, wow, I got to get something different. So I'm more relaxed as I'm talking, open up your diaphragm, and let your lungs breathe a little bit. So,
Right.
So I, got the radio arm, that hold the mic, and, I guess, and you know what, I'm probably not using the right terms either, because you can tell I am a beginning kind of podcaster. You're
just fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Even though I've had a podcast doing it consistently for years now, it still feels like I'm learning new things. Just like a lot of things, right? You just learn as you go. So
I would pull out my phone and just hit the voice memo.
Yeah.
And so as I was thinking of things, I'm just talking out loud, and then I'd go back so I'd have record of, it's not just a thought in my head. I've actually talked it through a little bit too.
Yeah. And I'm going to share a secret too. I am, obviously I think a lot of people could tell I'm not a natural radio podcast voice kind of guy, right? Like my voice is, and we all don't like our voice a lot of times. We hear it and we're like, oh my goodness, is that what I sound like? I really would encourage people not to let that discourage them, because I had the same thoughts, and maybe there are people out there who don't want to listen to my voice. That's fine. But there are people out there who have, emailed me and actually tried to get a hold of me through podcast, type of apps and stuff, and said, hey man, really appreciate what you said. And so it didn't matter to them, Right. But going back to the voice memoing in your car, you might hear yourself and think, ooh, maybe I should, tone down the way I laugh here. Or maybe I should, when I pronounce that word, articulate it just a little bit more instead of just saying the word. And so you start to critique yourself a little bit, and it's very healthy, because if you're not critiquing yourself when somebody else does, it's going to hurt you 10 times more. So, get in a habit of critiquing yourself and being okay with that. I still have so much work to do in how I articulate myself and relay a message, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's important. Listening to yourself, evaluating, even if it's not just that voice memo, but a lot of podcasters will record and they never listen to their podcast. I've had that conversation. I don't want to listen to it again, but I do think it's important to go back and just to evaluate. Maybe you're not listening to learn again, but you're listening to evaluate, how am I doing as an interviewer? How am I doing as a communicator? Are my thoughts making sense as I verbalize them? They do to me, but as I listen to it, do they make sense? The other thing too, that for those that don't like the sound of their voice, number one, you get used to it. Yeah. Number two, no one else really cares. They're not listening. When they're listening to a podcast, they're not listening for that radio broadcast voice. I think that's the beauty of podcasting, right? Anybody can do it, and someone's going to connect with it. And then you can edit, right? I love the fact that you can edit. Like earlier in this episode, my dog started barking, and no one will ever know that because it won't be in the podcast, right? So if you say something stupid, you can edit it out, you can cut it out, but you can also mix and use plugins and all of that to change how your voice sounds even. So one of the things that I suggest to people that I found really helpful is to find a network somewhere, whether it's your host site, Podomatic, or jumping on Facebook and finding a group of other podcasters that are, maybe they're in your same niche, maybe they're not, but another group of people that you can learn from and talk to and even share, be guests on and have them as guests on yours. So I do think that's super valuable. You're not in this alone. You should always have a community of people around you, no matter what you're doing. So, and it's probably something you talk about a lot in your people development podcast, I would imagine. I want to talk about some challenges you face as we kind of head towards the end of the conversation. What are some challenges that you faced early on? I know you talked about the tech, having to learn GarageBand, having to learn a Mac. Any other things with maybe putting your podcast out there and staying motivated? That's something that people deal with. Staying motivated when
you get 2 or 3 listeners on those first couple episodes. How do you keep pushing through? Maybe you didn't deal with that challenge, but what were some other challenges that maybe you did face?
Well, early on, I was trying to pay attention to the numbers. I was like, oh, I got 100 listeners now. That's pretty cool. And then I saw kind of a plateau there for a while. And so as you start to build some sort of listening audience, it becomes a little bit more motivating. But before then, which it could take a year or 2 years to even do that, right? Before then, I was paying attention to the numbers,
Right.
and it was kind of discouraging, right? It was like, oh man, like how am I going to get more people on this? One thing I realized early, and it happened to me when I was, on my phone, I was looking at the podcast I was listening to in my library, and I noticed that there was a podcast on there that hadn't had a new episode in 2 months. And so I instantly unfollowed it and got it out of my library. And it dawned on me, okay, if I did that, how many people would do that if I paused my podcast? I would lose any listening audience that I had. So early on, I made it a point that I would always at least put something out there every month. And again, inertia, I think we sometimes get that fear of like, is it perfect? No decision is a decision, right? And so I decided early on that I was just going to put it out there and I was going to do my best. And that's all I could ask for. So consistency is a huge piece of that. I know people say, and I've had the conversations with other podcasters like, man, I just don't think I can put it out there each month or each week. Sometimes I've had conversations with people that have weekly podcasts and they're like, I just can't do it. That's obviously it's 52 podcasts a year. That's so many. And my question to them is, what if you just said on one of your podcasts, hey, we're going to go to monthly to bring the best content to our listening audience? Do you think that your audience would actually, view that as a negative? And some people have said, yes, they count on me weekly. I've heard them say that. And other people have been like, you know what, dude, you're right. Like at the end of the day, if I go monthly, I'm sure they're not going to care. So I guess my advice is if you're going to create a new podcast, if you're going to start one, be realistic in how many times you can do it in a month. If it's once a month, I think you have to create some sort of rhythm though. If you go less than once a month, say you go bi-monthly, I think you do kind of, you kind of hit a sweet spot somewhere in there. And I've noticed listeners continually going up throughout the years with a monthly podcast. So I can speak from it from there. So anyways, have a good rhythm and stick to it. Make sure that you hold yourself accountable. And if you can't do that, then ask somebody to hold you accountable. Just someone to just check in with you,
Yeah. Consistency is super key. I think podcast listeners are creatures of habit in that sense. So I know there's 2 podcasts that come out every Wednesday morning. And those are the first 2 things when I get out of bed and I'm getting ready in the morning, I hit those podcasts. If they didn't drop an episode, I'm going, what's wrong?
Yeah.
Like my day is all messed up now. So finding your rhythm is important for you, but I think it builds trust and habits with your listeners too, to grow that audience and build trust with people that really want to hear what you have to say and what you have to share. I'm curious, for someone, let's say a small business that's looking to start a podcast for their business, it's not just a hobby, it's not just a personal thing.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to somebody in that space on, I'll just leave it at that. What advice would you give to a small business owner that's looking to start a podcast related to their business?
Yeah, I think of it on 2 sides. One, is it for your employees? And is it for, and 2, is it for like customers? Is it for clients? So what's your target audience? So first advice is to figure that out. What's your target audience? Second, I think that if you're going to do that, a good starting point for businesses would definitely be to create kind of more of a short window podcast. So let's say you can dedicate yourself to like 6 episodes or something like that, and create a short, podcast list for just for that first one, and see how it goes. Because you might want to pivot and create content based upon another type of strategy. And that's okay, because if you said this is our podcast episodes for this duration, then next time you can create another duration for a targeted audience that's maybe different. And then you can share those podcasts with whoever your target audience is. So if it's internal employees, send it out in an email, put it in your newsletter, put it on your intranet, and share it and say, hey, this is the CEO's heart, or this is our strategy going into next year, or whatever it is. If it's for customers, you can actually send it to them as well as a link. So I would start small and ensure that you're understanding who your target audience is. I think is a great starting point.
Where can people find you if they want to know more about Living Water Consulting, if they want to know more about the People Development Podcast, or just connect with you as an individual? Where can people find you on social?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is my main source. So if you go to LinkedIn, type in Harrison Tash, you'll find that Living Water Consulting. There's a page there as well. And I always share the podcast through there. But if you go to consultlivingwater.com, you'll also find the podcast on the first page.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Harrison. It was a fun conversation.
Yeah, Brian.
Glad to have you on the show today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was a great conversation, and hopefully it was helpful to the listeners.
I hope you enjoy these clips from my most recent episode of Good Podcasting with Harrison Tash. If you'd like to hear the full episode, there's a link in the description of this video.